I'm disappointed in our audience. And here's why. So usually I don't look at comments and such, but there was enough of a certain kind of response that I was made aware after this last live stream. So let me just back up and say, in this last live stream, you showed a clip of Rachel Maddow explaining on behalf of MSNBC why they would not be live streaming Trump's post-arraignment speech. I said that I wasn't convinced that this was egregious journalistic malpractice. Many disagreed with me. That's fine. You disagree with me. Zach disagrees with me. That's totally fine. What is disappointing is that many in the comments proclaimed that why I was disagreeing with you was because I've got TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. Right. So put aside the fact that it's laughable, right? Like, if you've been listening for a while, if you know, if you've been watching us, you can be certain that's not true. But put that aside for the moment, right? This is the same level of argument. It's the same style and quality of argument as people proclaiming the following things. If you disagree with a day of absence, the only possible reason is that you're racist, right? The only reason to be hesitant about COVID vaccines is because you don't think COVID is a serious disease. If you argue for single-sex spaces for domestic abuse shelters and prisons, you're really claiming that every person who is trans-identified is a criminal, right? Like, each of these claims is wrong, right? And so is she said something I don't like, I'm going to mind read now and attribute other things to her that allow me to make broader claims that actually have no basis in reality, right? You're not a racist. Lots of us who are hesitant about COVID vaccines actually understand COVID to be a very serious disease. And of course, I don't know anyone who thinks everyone who is trans-identified is a criminal, right? And I could go on and on and on with this kind of list, right? And we've talked a lot over 3 years on our live stream and elsewhere about this conflation of the position with the person hearing the position is my interpretation of what else it means about you and how you're a really bad person, right? And it's sloppy, it's ridiculous, and it doesn't help, right? Like, part of what we're trying to do here, a big part of what we're trying to do here, is model conversation, including disagreement, wherein we can figure out where the disagreement is. Sometimes we just continue to disagree. And sometimes we realize that one, or in some cases both of us, have some misinterpretations, or we're standing in a place that wasn't the best place to stand. And yet one of the positions may be right, maybe both positions are wrong, maybe both of them have some truth. There's lots of ways for disagreement to resolve. But attributing belief or intention or motive to people based on a disagreement is the opposite of useful. And it's a large part of what is going on the so-called progressive left that looks to us not at all progressive, and that about which we complain a lot and point out the problems with that approach. And so it was super disappointing to see exactly that error over and over and over again in response to our legitimate disagreement last week.
Yep.
Or 3 days ago.
Two things. One, this is actually a very useful, so in general, a strong bias against mind reading is the correct way to keep your thinking functional, right? Mind reading is something most of us can't do. We don't understand what other minds are like, and there are a lot of reasons that people might arrive somewhere differently than you do. I would say a total prohibition is a mistake. Obviously, it is possible to...
Theory of mind is a kind of mind reading.
Well, yeah, right.
Right? And that
courts,
it is one of our superpowers as humans.
Courts do this all the time, right? They infer intent and it changes the nature of the crime. So it is possible, but one has to be very careful about how you do it logically. So it's a how to think question, and it's not a simple one. But in this case, the idea that you are suffering from TDS and that motivated something about your perspective on this is actually something that I'm in a perfect position to know for sure that doesn't make any sense, because I hear all of our private conversations. And if you were suffering from TDS, I'd know it. Now, whether they believe me that is not a fit is a different question. But
again, we can go here, and I think maybe we should, but I don't think it's the primary thing.
Right, I know.
The primary thing is not like, what if I were, right? Like, what if I did feel this way? It is still not about Trump, right?
Yep.
The fact that, for instance, MSNBC was clearly ideologically motivated in making the decision they did. Clearly ideologically motivated. Maddow as much as said it, right? They said he lies, he's lied before, he's going to lie again, right? It does not follow that anyone who sees that and says, I'm not sure that is the egregious example of journalistic malpractice you think it is similarly ideologically motivated.
Right.
That is an error right there. So whether or not I'm ideologically motivated, like as it turns out, I'm not in this case, like by at least in this regard, but whether or not I am, that is a logical fallacy. There's a logical error to say they were ideologically motivated. Therefore, you, in saying they're not as wrong as the people sitting next to you think they are, must be ideologically motivated. It's a logical fallacy.
It is. Yeah. The idea that one follows from the other, of course. Right. The problem that we have to deal with is sometimes one can infer intent, and these people didn't do a great job of it. I will say, I didn't actually see that. I'm sure it exists, and because my look was only cursory, what I saw was, what was the alternative to that? It was, the folks that I saw complaining were complaining about the fact that you did not think it was a breach to not broadcast Trump's remarks, which wasn't even the substance of what you said. Your objection was based on the question of whether or not they had an obligation to cover it live versus cover it later. Yep. And while I disagree with you, I do think they had an obligation to cover it live. The point is that isn't even consistent with the diagnosis that was apparently leveled at you.
Right. So, and I think that is, so I didn't see that, but that, again, so a misread of a conversation for which you could easily go back and replay the conversation is unhelpful if what we are trying to do is understand, how to move through this world with grace and forgiveness and honesty and truth seeking.
Yep.
Right. And so, throwing incorrect accusations at people is clearly a tool that is being used by lots and lots of people. And, I guess I was disappointed again to see it coming from those who listened to us enough that they were paying attention, live or, in the immediate aftermath of the live stream.
Okay. I want to connect it to two things that I know are going to come up later.
Great.
Some of which we have discussed before. What you are honing in on is a tendency to take a landscape with some richness to it and to turn it into a binary, a black and white, right? If you are on the wrong side of this issue, it is because X, right? There's only one reason you might make this argument, which I have deemed to be wrong. And if you're making that argument, then I know all of the things about what motivated it. Yep. And so I'm going to talk later about the tendency to make things that are not binary, and the tendency to make things that are binary, continuous.
Something we've talked about a lot with regard to the sex and gender landscape.
100%. And so my claim is going to be, a couple weeks ago, we talked about the fact that we are struggling against the sophists' central trick, which is because we are forced to use language to hash out an underlying truth that is not fundamentally linguistic, they can tangle the language layer, and we can't untangle it faster than they tangle it. But the point is, we're really arguing about something that is true and deep, and we are forced into this superficial layer of words, and that is causing a problem. So in this case, I think our audience doesn't know that they're doing it. None of us do when we engage in this. But by taking something that is complex and turning it into a false binary, right, you force us into this layer. And the point is, this layer is not a productive place. They're hypothesizing about an internal cognitive process that they can't know anything about.
Right. And I mean, it's not just sort of neutral. I'm like, oh, that's not helpful. It's explicitly anti-helpful, right? Yeah. Like the only reason you could disagree with, the only way that you could have arrived at disagreement here is because you have Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
Well, no. I mean, almost never will there be a situation with, in a complex, especially like political landscape, where there's all these people who believe one thing, and then the only way you could have arrived at the opposite thing is through one route.
Yeah.
What are the chances? It's actually extraordinarily unlikely that you have richness and diversity of root and of opinion on one side and none on the other, none at all. So it's easy to demonize, it's easy to mind read, it's easy to it's far easier, and you feel better, I guess, in the moment by saying, but no, not interested, bad person, stupid person, naive person, has the syndrome, has the problem, has the blindness, therefore I don't need to pay any attention. And certainly there are places where you've gotten so far and you've listened to someone a lot, you've listened to a position a lot, you've done a lot of research, you've read the primary literature, whatever it is, whatever kind of situation it is, and you said, you know what, at this point, it's a high bar. Like I don't have to listen to detractors on this point anymore because I've already done all this thinking. The burden of proof is now on you. Well, that's not what this situation is, but there are certainly situations like that. Like, you know what? I don't have to listen to everyone who comes through the door. Like you don't have to talk to everyone who wants to talk to you, and neither do I, right? Yep. We get to make those choices.
Yeah. I also think this is a perfect example. If people are watching our stream, like we have a few haters who do that mining for stuff. Sure. But in general, if they're listening to us, the point is this is a place where you can afford to just simply err on the side of a generous interpretation of what might be motivating somebody. And in fact, in this case, if you were to go back, you'd see that you were navigating, you weren't defending CNN, but you were saying MSNBC. Mm-hmm. You were saying effectively, I'm not sure you have them dead to rights journalistically, right, because did they have an obligation to broadcast it live, which is not, that is inconsistent with the position of you being ideologically motivated and therefore siding with them in not covering it. Right. They're two different positions. So anyway, it's a good place to test your own argument.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, and I guess just one more thing around this is that in the middle of that conversation in the live stream from 3 days ago, I said, I don't like that we feel compelled when we're introducing someone who appears to be politically, for instance, different from us. I don't agree with everything he says, right? Yep. We talked about this with regard to Tucker Carlson, yep, right? And I will remind everyone of that part of that conversation, which I think was very fruitful. That yep, you shouldn't expect to agree with 100% of what anyone else in your sphere or outside of your sphere says. That would be extraordinarily surprising, unless you're an ideologue. Unless what you've done is accepted all that you believe from someone else, and if other people are doing that same thing, then everything I believe comes from the RNC or the DNC or the WHO or some other freaking 3-letter acronym that you really shouldn't be trusting to do all of your thinking for you.
Well, I would say it slightly differently. I would say if you agree completely with any complex set of conclusions from somebody else, then it is evidence that what you are doing is not trying to look for truth. What you are doing is trying to accomplish something. A coalition of people can agree mm-hmm, to all sign up for a slate of claims, right? Because it advances the ball. But the point is, it isn't the same thing as them believing those claims. And
yeah, I mean, I guess it's important, but it feels like a slightly different point. That if you really can't find a point of distinction in your beliefs from someone else, that is evidence of the fact that you didn't generate them yourself. Why did someone else generate them for you? That's what you're talking about. And I mean, I think this is often where like you and I tend to analysis at slightly different levels. Like I tend to analysis at the individual level, and you are more likely to tend to analysis at the population level with regard to these sorts of questions, right? And so I'm saying, look inside of yourself. If you feel like, if you're certain that you've got an army of people who all think the same and you're in lockstep, maybe you don't think the same at all. Maybe you just don't think.
Well, what I'm saying nets out to, it goes without saying that I don't necessarily agree with everything X person, Tucker Carlson, says, right, because I'm actually trying to make sense of the world. And it would be natural to find points of disagreement with literally any person who had a similarly complex view of the universe. So right, at the point, So the fact that that needs to be said is a symptom of the fact that a large part of the conversation that pretends to be about making sense of the world isn't about any such thing.
Yeah.
It's about politics. It's about advancing a ball,
Yep.
right? Which is a necessary evil at best.